welcome. You're watching The Decoded with me, Javisha Srivastav. Let's dive right in. There is an old saying in politics: perception often matters more than reality. Today, that saying is being tested once again in America. Donald Trump's personal wealth has surged dramatically since returning to the White House, with estimates placing his net worth far higher than it was just a few years ago. His investments, licensing deals, media ventures, and business interests have all benefited from renewed public attention. On paper, it is an extraordinary financial comeback. But outside the White House gates, millions of Americans are asking a very different question. If the economy is improving, why do our wallets feel empty? Why are families struggling to buy homes, pay medical bills, or clear their credit card debt while the country's most powerful politicians are becoming richer and richer and the people are struggling? Today, on the show, we break down one of the biggest political contradictions shaping America before the midterm elections. It is the growing gap between presidential wealth and everyday American hardship. More importantly, could Donald Trump's own financial success become a political liability? Let's break it down. To understand why this story matters, it is important to separate economic statistics from economic experience. On paper, several indicators show that the US economy has shown resilience. Unemployment remains relatively low compared to historical standards. Stock markets have remained strong. Corporate profits have recovered. Inflation has eased from its peak. Yet, none of these numbers automatically translate into financial comfort for ordinary households. Americans do not measure prosperity by GDP growth or Wall Street indexes. They measure it every time they walk into a grocery store, pay rent, receive a hospital bill, or make their monthly mortgage payments. That disconnect between official data and everyday reality is now becoming one of the defining political issues in the country. Let's take inflation first. Even though the pace of inflation has slowed compared to the post-pandemic surge, prices have not gone back to where they were. A family that paid one amount for groceries in 2021 is still paying significantly more today. Food, utilities, insurance, and childcare remain expensive. Inflation cooling simply means that prices are rising, but slowly, not that life has become cheaper. Then comes America's growing credit card crisis. Household credit card balances have climbed to record highs as families increasingly rely on borrowed money to maintain their standard of living. Interest rates on many credit cards remains above 20%, which means that carrying debt has becoming painfully expensive. For many Americans, every month becomes a cycle of paying interest rather than reducing the principal. Instead of buying and building wealth, families are paying simply to stay afloat. Rising debt is often a warning sign that the consumer confidence is weakening. Housing presents another major challenge. Home ownership has become increasingly difficult, especially for younger Americans. Mortgage rates remain far above the ultra-low level since just a few years ago, dramatically increasing monthly payments. At the same time, home prices have remained elevated because of limited housing supplies. This double burden has created a situation where millions of working Americans cannot even buy a house or comfortably rent one. Housing has always been one of the strongest indicators of economic confidence. Today, for many Americans, it has become a symbol of economic frustration instead. Now comes healthcare. Healthcare continues to add another layer of financial pressure. Despite America spending more on healthcare almost than any other country, many families still face high insurance premiums and unexpected medical bills. Medical emergencies remain one of the leading reasons behind financial stress and even personal bankruptcy in the United States. When healthcare, housing, and food all becomes more expensive simultaneously, voters start asking questions. Questions whether economic recovery is actually benefiting them or not. This is where Donald Trump's rising wealth enters the political conversation. Legally, there is nothing unusual about a president having a significant personal wealth. The political battle inside the UK is no longer just about who leads the country. It is increasingly becoming a battle over what kind of leadership the UK actually needs. The then Prime Minister Keir Starmer is now facing criticism not only from opposition parties but also from influential voices within his own political camp. The latest flashpoint involves Andy Burnham, one of Labour's most popular regional leaders, after reports emerged that Burnham suggested that the UK should spend less time on international diplomacy and more time fixing problems at home. According to reports, Starmer privately pushed back, warning Burnham that Britain cannot afford to reduce its diplomatic engagement with the rest of the world. Now, what may appear to be policy disagreement is now quickly turning into a much bigger debate about Britain's political priorities and Labour's future direction. At the center of this disagreement lies a question that has dominated British politics ever since Labour returned to power. Should the government continue investing political capital, financial resources and diplomatic attention abroad while millions of Britons continue struggling with rising living costs, pressure on the National Health Service, housing shortages, stagnant economic growth and growing public dissatisfaction? Since taking office, Starmer has firmly positioned Britain alongside its NATO allies in supporting Ukraine, promising long-term military assistance, humanitarian aid and financial backing. His government argues that helping Ukraine is not charity but a strategic investment in European security. But this argument has not convinced everyone. Across parts of the country, many voters increasingly believe that domestic concerns should come first. Britain's economy has shown signs of stabilization after years of turbulence. Yet, many households continue to struggle with inflation, expensive mortgage, rising rents, and public services that remain under severe pressure. Waiting list within the NHS remains one of the biggest political issues facing the government, while local councils across England continue to warn about financial difficulties. Against this backdrop, critics ask that whether billions spent supporting Ukraine could have instead have been directed towards schools, hospitals, policing, and economic recovery. Economists often point out that governments' budgets are far more complicated and simply moving money from one policy to another is not sufficient. This growing public frustration has also given rise to a phrase increasingly discussed in parts of Britain's political conversation. It is the so-called Zelensky curse. It is not an official political term or an accepted academic theory, but rather a phrase used by some commentators and critics who argue that Western leaders risk their own popularity when they appear more focused on supporting Volodymyr Zelensky than addressing their own domestic concerns. Similar criticism have surfaced in several European countries where governments have backed Ukraine strongly while simultaneously facing voter anger over inflation, over energy costs, declining living standards. It is within this political climate that Andy Burnham's comments have attracted enormous attention. Burnham has spent years cultivating an image as a leader who prioritizes local communities over Westminster politics. During the COVID-19 pandemic, he earned national recognition after publicly challenging the Conservative government over financial support for Greater Manchester, a confrontation that significantly boosted his popularity. Many Labour supporters see him as someone who understands everyday concerns outside London and speaks directly about issues that are affecting working families. After all, that's what politics is about. One vision sees UK as an active global power with responsibilities extending beyond its borders. The other argues that restoring public confidence requires an overwhelming focus on domestic renewal before expanding international ambitions. Neither position is entirely new, but the debate has become sharper as public frustration over living standards continue to shape British politics. Now, whether Andy Burnham would become a larger national figure remains uncertain. But this episode has undoubtedly elevated his profile. For many voters dissatisfied with the political establishment, he represents a politician willing to question the balance between international commitments and local priorities. The larger question now facing Britain is not simply whether it should support Ukraine or invest at home. It is whether a government can successfully convince voters that it is capable of doing both at the same time. Donald Trump entered politics as a billionaire businessman. What do you expect from a billionaire? And many presidents have either been wealthy before entering office or become sustainably wealthier after. From book deals and speaking engagements to investment returns and business appreciation, presidential wealth has always grown after leaving the office. History shows that financial success among American presidents is not unprecedented. What makes the current situation different is timing. Trump's wealth is expanding at a time when millions of voters continue to struggle with affordability. Politics is often less about absolute numbers and more about comparisons. The sharper the comparison becomes, the more politically sensitive it can be for the leader. Now, it is also important to distinguish between legality and political optics. Now, wealth itself is not a crime, nor does becoming rich is. Everyone can become rich. However, public perception plays a decisive role in democratic politics. Voters constantly evaluate whether their leaders understand their basic struggles or not. A president whose financial fortunes are rising rapidly while their citizens are battling debt and cost of living, it makes the leader disconnected. Even if no ethical violations are established, the image itself can become politically damaging. Elections are shaped as much by emotions as by economic statistics. Interestingly, this challenge is not unique to Donald Trump. American history offers multiple examples of presidents whose personal fortunes increased during or after their political careers. And that brings us to an even bigger question. Does wealth make voters trust their leaders more or less? The answer depends entirely on context. Some American believes that financial success demonstrates competence. They argue that a successful businessman knows how to manage an economy better than any other career politicians. This narrative has been central to Donald Trump's political identity for years. Supporters often see his business background as proof that he understands growth, he understands business, he understands investment and job creation. For them, their personal wealth reinforces leadership rather than weakening them. But there's another crucial argument. Critics say that extreme wealth creates distance rather than trust. They argue that billionaires cannot fully understand the financial pressures faced by working families, struggling with rent, struggling with healthcare costs, struggling with inflation. After all, they are billionaires. For these voters, personal enrichment while citizens are facing hardship creates a credibility gap. The question becomes simple. Can someone living in extraordinary financial comfort truly understand the challenges of people who are living with paycheck to paycheck? And that may be the defining political battle heading into America's midterm elections. Donald Trump's growing fortune is not simply a story about one president become wealthier. It is becoming a symbol of a much larger debate over inequality, affordability, and economic fairness. The central question now facing voters is no longer whether America is growing. It is about whether ordinary Americans are growing with it. Because in the end, elections are rarely decided by balance sheets. They are decided by whether citizens believe that their system is working for them or is it working for those who are already at top.